So a little housekeeping yet before we get started into the first session. So you've all got your name badges. It's a sold out meeting, and then we're having some folks yet you want to join us. So the big thing is, if you've got your badge, this is your food ticket, so don't lose it, right? So we're going to make sure folks who have badges go in line first, and so yeah, don't set it down somewhere if you can avoid that. So and then you should have a grab bag of some different items. You've got your Pawpaw hat in there. You've got a program hopefully that you picked up, and some other items also. Pen and I'm trying to remember what else was in there, but I think it was it. So there you go. So with no further ado, I think we're going to move into the first session, and that is about a registry for new varieties. So we'll bring up that beginning presentation. And basically, I just, the whole goal of this conference, and that theme of cultivating excellence in the next chapter of Pawpaw development, we really wanted to hit upon breeding, innovative breeding, the new cultivars that are out there, because a lot's been done and released since 2016. And then also talk about a registry. And this is something that really has been discussed by a number of people, especially with Neal and myself and some others, about what does this mean, And if we go to the next slide. I guess I have to do that. There we go. There we go. No, wrong way. And so today we're going to hear, I'm just going to talk for just a few minutes, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mark DeBard and then Neal Peterson, and then we may have a number of other people kind of join us in this discussion. But basically it comes down to this. There's a kind of a large number of named varieties that are out there right now. I'm just going to say that. There are many, many people naming cultivars, right? And so, I think some people, they go to a lot of work on trying to make sure that it's a good variety, and they go out and they propagate it, and they go out and make sure that it yields the same fruit, But some people kind of go into the woods, they have a pawpaw they think looks pretty good, and then all of a sudden it becomes the Johnson, no offense to Johnson cultivar, whatever it's going to be, right? Wildcat, whatever name folks choose. And does that really mean it's a superior cultivar, right, to what we have? And the answer might be no, right? It might be something that somebody considers really good, but it might be a very small fruit compared to what a lot of the folks are expecting compared to some of the current varieties that are out there. So just what does that mean, right, when you name a variety? And then, is that really this proliferation of naming varieties actually kind of hurting the development of the pawpaw industry? Because people may plant some of these varieties that are out there that have been named, and then they're not really very good varieties, and they haven't really been tested in different places. There's been a little bit of work already done on trying to at least categorize pawpaws and out there right now varieties, and actually just going back to the American Society for Horticultural Science and another organization, the American Pomological Society, they put together this basically registry of new fruit and nut cultivars. And so there's a number of pawpaw varieties of Neal's and K-State and a number of others that have been on that list. So that's at least one place where people usually report data, right, about how it performed, what was the yield, what was the size of the fruit, what was the fruit quality. And actually an extension of that is that then this is basically a web database, a fruit nut database, and it has many different varieties on it, or different fruit species. And you can go on and you can see up in the corner up there, this is the pawpaw list. And there's, I think, about 30 pawpaw varieties on this list. And then they basically are just reporting information about the varieties that's already out there, right? So we don't necessarily know where that came from. In our case, it came from our yield trials out here, but in other cases it may not. And then there's some other folks who've been kind of collecting some information. So I think, is Blake here already? Blake around? There he is, yep. So, Blake has been assembling a list of cultivars, and he's been putting information that he's been able to obtain about those varieties out there. So he's got a pretty long list now. It's but once again, we don't always know what the sourcing of that information is. And so, and then of course, K-State does have maybe kind of a database right now, also varieties. And I think some people reference this list with their lists, but that's basically, we collected what we thought was fruit weights and other information and the origins of where these different varieties were selected. And that's on our website. So, that is out there, at least, that information. But it really, when Neal and I were talking and others, there does need to be, I guess, there needs to be maybe some different systems put in place, I'll say. And so there can be one that's kind of like, oh, these are the reported named varieties, right? But then we also kind of need to have a database of these are the named varieties people selected, and we actually know something about them, right? How much they yield and whether you should really plant them or not, right? And so that's kind of what got this discussion started. And it could go a lot of different directions, right? But I thought we'd have a discussion. That's just my opening preamble on this. So I know that Mark DeBard, who's our next up, is coming up. He's got some experience in some of these things, so he's going to tell us about some of his work that he's done before with another crop. And then Neal is going to come up and then talk about his thoughts on this, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So, Mark?
I'm going to wait for the slides to come up. Almost back to the beginning. Thank you. All right. I'm kind of the ringer in this room. I'm a pawpaw enthusiast, but not an expert by any means. I do grow some pawpaws on my personal property. I know a little bit about them. I, as a hobby, keep track of all the cultivars. Blake and I have been talking lately, sharing our cultivar lists, and we're going to talk about how extensive these have become. I'm a retired emergency physician. If any of you have a problem while we're here, I'm happy to provide advice or whatever. But since I retired 9 years ago, I've been a master gardener in the Columbus, Ohio State area. I volunteer at Chadwick Arboretum there and Dawes Arboretum in Newark, Ohio. And I'm a lilac horticulturist and probably an expert in lilacs. I'm on the board of directors of the International Lilac Society, and most importantly for what we're talking about today, I'm the international registrar for the International Register of Cultivar Names in the genus Syringa, which is lilacs. So I've been doing that for some years, and I have some insight and expertise into it. And when I started my interest in pawpaws, I was a little taken aback wondering where the registry is for pawpaws. And I eventually learned there's really not a formal registry, and it tends to be more of an American one. It is a native American fruit after all, but pawpaws have gone international as well. And there are ways to have international registries where the countries of the world cooperate, and that's what I hope to show you today. So the way these registries internationally developed was some very old roots. The first roots were in North America. If you don't know Andrew Jackson Downing, he was probably the first major landscape architect in America, and he designed the gardens at the White House and the Capitol grounds. He also had the design made for Central Park, which after he died at the age of 36 in a major steamboat accident, the Henry Clay, if you don't know about that, is a pretty famous steamboat accident. He was killed in that, but it was his plan that Frederick Law Olmsted inherited for New York Central Park and also for the gardens surrounding the Smithsonian Museum. So he was a pretty important guy for landscape architecture and also pomology. He was actually one of the first labeled pomologists in the country as well. And he released some books about these subjects, including cultivars that the Cincinnati, Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts pomological societies took up and began having a cultivar database for fruits. Over in Europe, in 1864, Alphonse de Candolle presented at the Brussels International Conference the same type of thing, which eventually led to an international horticultural naming convention in 1927. Those efforts all came together globally in 1953 and resulted in the establishment of the International Code of Nomenclature for Cultivated Plants, the ICNCP. So in 1953, the most recent edition of that, the 9th edition, came out in 2016. This is a voluntary registration system for cultivars throughout the entire world, and we're going to see how that works. So this will look busy to you, but I assure you it's important. So follow with me and I'll try and break it down for you so you know how this works in the world, not just in the United States. The ICNCP is controlled by the International Commission for the Nomenclature of Cultivated Plants, and you see where that is on the list up there. It's one of 3 divisions of the International Union for Biological Sciences, and that itself is one of 250 components of the International Council of Scientific Unions, which merged just a few years ago and was renamed the International Scientific Council. So you see that up at the top there. And the ISC eventually falls under UNESCO, under the United Nations Charter. So I kind of went from bottom to the top, and now let's go a little more from the top down to the bottom to get to where I want to get. The IUBS has a second division called the International Society for Horticultural Science, the ISHS. And the ISHS really controls the registries for the genera around the world. It establishes ICRAs, the International Cultivar Registration Authorities, for every genus. So every genus can have, and usually does have, an ICRA. And the ICRA is in charge of keeping track of and registering all of the cultivars in the world for a particular genus. All right? So Syringa, which is my expertise, is lilacs, and Asamina, of course, for pawpaws. So each ICRA then independently appoints a registrar to handle the details of maintaining that register, and importantly, not just a register, a checklist of the cultivars in the genus. So there are multiple levels of certification of names within the ICRA registers, and we'll talk about those. The registrar has to use the ICNCP most recent edition as their authority for naming, accepting, establishing names, and eventually registering names of cultivars. This is the way it's done throughout the world. The ISHS itself is a big, big organization. 70,000 individuals, universities, governments, institutions, libraries, commercial companies. It has 14 divisions, 2 commissions, 130 working groups. Importantly for us, one division is for temperate tree fruits. One of the commissions is for cultivar registration, which establishes the ICRAs. And then you can have working groups which actually can have free membership in the ISHS and can sponsor international meetings like this meeting under the authority of the ISHS if they want to. So the ICRAs themselves are basically guardians of cultivated plant names. Their status is hosted by ISHS on the website. You can go to the ISHS website and find who has been assigned the organizational authority for a particular ICRA. And then each ICRA lists who their registrar is for each genus. So they got to use the ICNCP. They establish an accurate, stable, uniform system for cultivated plant names. One of their big jobs is to prevent duplicate names in cultivars, and we already are having that problem with pawpaws, with some duplicated names. They foster international communication and understanding. So this is a big deal, especially with lilacs, which are really native to Eastern Asia and Eastern Europe. There are no native lilacs in the United States. So we have to cooperate internationally. The registrar for lilacs is maintained in English, but we always list the original name in the original language as well as the transliterated name into English. So I've had to learn how to read and write Cyrillic and properly transliterate Cyrillic into English, because the greatest lilac cultivars in the world are from Russia right now in the last 25 years. And unfortunately, we can neither import nor export lilacs in the United States. So that's a big problem for us in that particular genus. Apparently, that is not true with pawpaws from what I'm hearing and understanding, but I don't know enough about that yet. So you have to be able to talk to people internationally and maintain a proper register with the proper information with international cooperation. The last thing to note is that the entire system is voluntary. All right, it's international but voluntary. It's sort of the horticultural world's attempt to self-regulate without the government telling them what to do. So the ICRA itself has to be international. Its job is to register new cultivar names using formal criteria, but it also has less formal systems. So you can establish a name without registering it by finding or publishing it in print, which also establishes priority for names. It has to have been published in print to establish a priority for that name. Most of the ICRAs will take on the task of publishing a name for you if you're unable to do that yourself. So you can submit an application to them. I know for lilacs, a lot of the ones come out of Japan, and I publish those through a cooperative arrangement with the Royal Botanical Garden in London to make sure once a year we get all those into print and establish the priority of those names. We can also accept new names that are in common use, that are not necessarily been printed, or sometimes not necessarily even sold. But there are various levels of putting it, and that becomes part of the checklist and not the register for cultivar names. We do note trademark and breeder names in the register. Again, they're sort of part of the checklist, but we keep complete information, all the synonyms that are out there, the original breeder names, we keep track of those and put those in there as well. If you have a patented name, that's usually the name that goes in there. The trademark name is not used as a registered name, but it is mentioned in the information for the actual cultivar name. And then you have two more obligations as a ICRA and registrar, and that's to maintain the information on a publicly accessible website. So if you go to the International Lilac Society, internationallilacssociety.org, you'll see our website, and on the front of the website is a link to the Lilac Register, and that is publicly available. We have some appendices and some private lists, Excel documents, talking about more details that we maintain for our members only. But the main list has to be accessible to the public, and it has to be accessible on a website. And then one of the requirements is to publish in book form, in print, a copy of the register every 5 or 10 years. They say 5, but they'll give you 10, and I've gone with 10. It's a lot of work to publish a book. The duties, so the ICRA sponsoring organization, whichever one you choose, has to do some things to be able to be an ICRA. So they have to provide for time and costs of a register. They have to nominate a volunteer registrar familiar with the ICNCP, with a knowledge of the genus and the genus community, and a registrar that has some previous experience with this entire process is preferable if there's some competition for the position. And they have to ensure that all the registered epithets comply with the ICNCP. They have to maintain records of the origin, characteristics, history of each cultivar in the genus in practical detail. And then if you want to do more things, you can use appendices to the register. One of my appendices lists biographical information on all the breeders of all the different lilac cultivars. So there's many appendices that you can add to the register in the end. They do not, and this is something I really want to emphasize, they do not conduct trials to compare cultivars. They don't decide if one cultivar is better than another, and they do not judge distinctiveness of a cultivar, unlike patents. Okay, so we're not into comparing cultivars, we're into keeping an orderly environment of naming of cultivars with details about them. This is not about judging quality of cultivars. If you want to do that, that is a separate project entirely. All right? And a lot of people want to do that, and I think you should, but that's not what this is about. So this is the current structure, the best I've been able to ascertain. So there really isn't one, but we'll get to that. There's over 1,000 unassigned woody plants genera, including Asamina. Now, just for your information, there's about 30,000 genera out there under most estimates. And so almost all of them have an assigned registry. There's just a few that don't, and 1,000 of them are the woody plants genera. The ornamental woody plants, like lilacs, which are unassigned, are assigned to the American Public Gardens Association as the ICRA for each genus, just to keep track of them. But there isn't an official register for each one of these. They're just given to the APGA to maintain some sort of information database on them. The APGA has assigned Stefan Lura at the USNA as the registrar for all of those orphaned ICRAs, and they have new registrations appear in Hort Science, which the ASHS will then publish. The non-ornamental woody plants, like Asamina, have no official registers or registrars, nothing under the ISHS authority, nothing official at this time. There is one exception to this that I was able to find, and that's the mango. So the mango does have an official registry, and the ICRA for it is an organization in India, which is one of the two areas where mangoes originated, and they do publish a register of mango cultivars. So it's the only non-woody plant, non-ornamental woody plant fruit that I was able to find that has an official register. So pawpaws would be pretty early in that process. So right now we have informal registers for them. The edible fruits and nuts are informally registered, as you heard earlier, with the American Pomological Society's Fruit and Nut Register, which was started in 1944. It's published biennially in Hort Science, covers North American origin pomological cultivars since 1920, and it's maintained on their website. You saw an example of it earlier. It's complemented by a fruit and nut cultivar database with similar information. So this, for example, is the information they have on Davis as a pawpaw cultivar, and you can see the type of stuff that they've kept in that. Dr. Pomper is the official registrar for that fruit and nut database. So right now, I have an informal spreadsheet of pawpaw cultivars that I just played with on my own of 236 different cultivar names. All right, that's a lot, and it's certainly enough to need a formal registry to start keeping some order in this world. At the moment, they're all for Asamina triloba. There's 30 names in the APA's informal register versus my 236. And we may end up with cultivars for other Asamina species as well. May well be a market for smaller pawpaw fruit, smaller container type plants in different species. Who knows? I see that's coming in the future eventually too. And this register would keep track of those. Asamina cultivars are spread outside their native region, particularly to Europe, and they're likely going to spread to all temperate climates in the world eventually. Even New Zealand is going to be able to grow pawpaws, right? And parts of Australia, particularly down in Tasmania, there's no reason they can't grow them. China is going to have them. Japan for sure is going to have them. They're going to be all over. They're all over Europe right now. So it seems reasonable to me to establish a formal international register under the ICRA system and the authority of the ISHS, so we have an international cooperative effort in the dissemination of pawpaw cultivar names. How would you do that? You'd have to apply to the ISHS for an ICRA-sponsored register and checklist. That requires probably, in my opinion, appointing a study group to choose an appropriate organization to function as the ICRA with international connections. That organization has to agree to sponsor it for free, the Asamina ICRA, under the rules of the ISHS and the authority of the ICNCP. And that organization has to agree to appoint an appropriate volunteer registrar. We do this for free, by the way. Most of you who work will not want to put in the time that this requires. This either requires somebody with deep pockets that can have a registrar on their payroll, or someone who's retired. Most of us retirees, I mean, that's what we do in retirement. We volunteer, right? This is my life. I volunteer for everything. I'm just as busy as when I worked. I just don't get paid anymore, right? All right, so that's what we do, and they're probably the best registrars. And the register has to be accessible to the public for free, maintained on a website, and be published in print every 5 or 10 years, and you have to give yearly reports to the ISHS, who a gal at the Royal Botanic Garden in London is the one who handles those duties for them right now. That's it.
I think we'll hold for questions. We'll have Neal come up and talk next, and then we'll have a few questions. So this would be is this going to be the one?
No. I don't have a PowerPoint to go with these comments. I have a session coming up after this. These are not prepared remarks, which is probably good. These are spontaneous remarks. Pawpaw, is that not at the right level? Okay. Simina triloba, being North American native and definitely temperate. It has to have some winter temperatures to come into leaf the next year. That was tested decades ago when Desmond Lane took Pawpaw down to St. Croix in the Caribbean islands, and it grew very well the first year, dropped its leaves as it should, and never grew again. Didn't have any winter. The range is about 26 states in the U.S., and that's probably more than 1,500 counties. I'm very glad for the craze that has sprung up around pawpaws, because we now have a huge cadre of people who are exploring the woods and finding things. When I was doing my exploring, I probably only explored about 5 or 6 counties, and then only what I could do on foot. So that's a big improvement, and that's one of the reasons we have so many varieties being introduced. Now, when I was young, and probably this also agrees with your all's upbringing, I did not know the word cultivar. I only knew the word variety. But they mean in common use, it's basically synonymous, okay? Cultivar was a coined term many years ago for a cultivated variety, and the field of botany needed a term like cultivar because they already professionally had a meaning assigned to the word variety. I mean, you have family, then you have genus, then within genus you have species, but then the taxonomist who looks at morphology may distinguish levels, gradations on traits that are smaller than the species level. And they will call those either subspecies and sometimes varieties. So that's where the word cultivar was distinguished, that these are populations of plants that we usually grow in our garden. It's a variety, but it had a different meaning. So they coined the word cultivar for a cultivated variety. Now, I'm happy that there is such interest to going out and foraging in the wild, because while I don't do that anymore, I don't think my body lets me do much of that. We have a whole cadre of people who are finding things in the wild. The problem that we begin to encounter is making sense of what's being found. And because the pawpaw can be grown in any humid temperate zone, which is a great deal, on many continents, not really favorable in the western U.S. unless you irrigate, but certainly east of Kansas and Iowa, you can basically grow pawpaw as long as you got good soil drainage and don't have alkaline soils. So the question confronting us, I think, is how to make sense of what's being found. And we also have to think along the lines similar to the apple industry or peaches, is that a variety of apple that grows well in Georgia is probably not the variety that is going to grow well in New York State or in Oregon. And so we expect to see differences in terms of suitability for cultivation that are regional. So we may have something called, I'll pick a name out of the air, called Golden Moon, and is it going to grow well in Massachusetts where Timothy Lane lives? Or is it going to grow well in Quebec? We have a craze going on in Quebec for growing pawpaws up there. Or there's a lady in southern Sweden who wants to know if she can grow pawpaws over in Sweden. That's going to take testing. And one of the things you want to know about is, how many days from flowering to fruit ripening. And that'll differ among many of the varieties we already have. And this is one of the things that I know growers want to see in a register. They want to know, is this an early season pawpaw, mid, late season, what do we mean by each of those terms? So it's not enough to know, say, the weights of the fruits in a tree. And to be fair, you mustn't present your tree, the fruit weight from the tree as like the very biggest fruit in that tree. You want something that's more representative of the average, or that will show the range for the fruits in the tree. And at this point, I'm going to take a few questions from the audience to see what we should be addressing about a register. Are there any people with specific questions they'd like to see addressed? There's one.
How does this registry associate with the germplasm repositories? I mean, we have the USDA germplasm repositories. Is this associated with that, or is that in parallel to that, or how do these things come together?
I mean, they're sort of separate and they're not, because USDA has some funding for germplasm repositories, which we don't actually get any, but but they do have some funding, and their mission is to curate and store that material. So they might store those different varieties, but their goal is not to be a curator of the names of those varieties. And so they're just going to accumulate what they can, and then they'll distribute out. So that would not be a function of them.
He's saying that it's very separate. The two are very separate, the naming and the keeping of the the germplasm. One thing okay, question?
With the rise of DNA testing, is there anybody who's curating and testing these new varieties with DNA?
A little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. In fact, I've got some students working on that very thing right now, and there's actually, there's some misinformation about relatedness of some of the varieties out there, but DNA can really clear that up. So we are doing that, but as I said, there's a lot of varieties, and so to actually it takes money too. So to actually have DNA fingerprints for all the varieties is going to be quite a challenge.
One of the big problems we have in all genera is many of the cultivars are wrong that are out there. They're not actually the original one that was sold or designated, and we have no way of finding out. That's starting to change with the various markers in DNA, But it's a problem throughout all genera, and it's going to be a problem with pawpaws as well.
And this is a good time to point to naming conventions. Do not attach a number to a name that you think should apply to the cultivar, the variety you found. Here's a historical example where that goes wrong. John Gordon, who in the 1950s and 60s lived near Niagara, New York, was an active member in the Northern Nut Growers Society, so his interests included pawpaw, but many nuts as well. In his interest for pawpaws, he went back to some of the germplasm that had been collected by Slate, Dr. Slate. I think Slate may have been in a Cornell. But Slate got his stuff from Zimmerman in Pennsylvania. And this is now, when you're going to Zimmerman, you're going way back into the 20s, 30s, and 40s. Okay, so John had 4 seedlings that had that pedigree from Zimmerman to Slate to himself. And he called them Pennsylvania Golden, and he liked 4 of them, so he called them Pennsylvania Golden 1, 2, 3, and 4. And now we don't know which one is which, because everybody the number doesn't register the way that the name Pennsylvania Golden registers. And so if you buy Pennsylvania Golden, you don't know what you're getting, and they're not all equal in quality.
A very good point is that there are rules for naming cultivars in the ICNCP system, extremely detailed rules. It used to be you could use Latin names to name cultivars. That was outlawed, I don't know, maybe 40 years ago or so, 50 years ago now. So you do have to follow the international rules for naming. Unfortunately, those rules are fairly loose. And growers are taking advantage of that. If in the lilac world, you might name a cultivar SMN SDDTP, all right? And then the trademark name will be Bloomerang Dark Purple. Well, which one are you going to remember when you talk about? You're going to remember their trademark name, which they can keep for 100 years, versus the patent name or the cultivar name, which they can only keep for 20 years. So there's a lot of gaming of the system, but there are rules for naming them internationally.
And I'll add on to that business about patents and trademarks. I've been breeding pawpaws since I got in. My project started in '74, but my first orchard was planted in 1980, or was it 81? After a while, you lose track. But I did some patenting. It was very expensive when you added in the lawyer fees. It was something like, I think it was about more than $1,000 per patent.
Absolutely.
But when you're self-financed, it doesn't make sense to spend that sort of money. I never earned back what I put into the fees for the lawyer and the government fees. But the trademarks you can renew, and if you get in early, the trademark can be a memorable name in the growing industry. And it doesn't cost as much at all. Trademarks are relatively inexpensive. So that's the way I've gone. But the science behind naming doesn't allow for the trademark to be the name of the cultivar. But I just ignore that.
It works. There are a lot of ways around it.
Because there is if you like the original Wells, who knows where that is, and where's the original Mitchell,
Yeah. I think we have a short example here what can go wrong. Mr. Downing in Ohio, he was an apple grower on the very western side of the state of Ohio. He and his father did some early exploration in the 20s and 30s for good pawpaws in their part of Ohio. And they found one which was near the radio station, WLW Mason, and the other one was near Middletown, Ohio. Well, by the time I came along and was trying to track things down, I talked to Mr. Downing. He was about 90 years old, like walking with a cane. Okay, I get that. And he said he would send me cyanwood. He would send his nephew out, or his grandnephew, I think. So somebody who was in his teens or early 20s out to collect science. And he collected the Middletown sign and sent it to me, and I propagated it. It's one of the lousiest pawpaws I ever tasted or grew. And we kind of conclude that what happened is that the grandnephew didn't know where to go on the property to get this pawpaw, and he collected something else. This is the stuff that you'll find happens.
Yeah, Middletown's probably extinct, the original anyway. Other questions?
Well, we'll still have a few more questions. I was going to, maybe we hand the microphone to Blake for 1 second. If you want to just comment on your registry or list that you put together and how you're doing that too.
Yeah, so when I wrote the book, Pawpaw is the Complete Growing and Marketing Guide, I included about 150 cultivars. And since then, that was around 10 years ago now, since then, I reevaluated the list, and there were just so many absolutely obscure pawpaws on there, like car wreck and pickle, and just other things that just were just too obscure. And also some that were available at the time, which now appear not to be available for various reasons. And so I went through the entire list. I skimmed off probably half of it. I added some 30 or so brand new cultivars, including Tom Wall's new selections, a few selections I've made over the years, and whatever else is new and available. So I was focusing on varieties that are currently available, that are in circulation, not just ones that are in, an obscure planting somewhere that aren't really available. So, and I included also information on size and quality as best as I could based on research websites that are nursery websites, and also forums where people are talking about the varieties and everything. So I was just trying to focus on ones that are actually available in circulation.
You make a really good point, Blake. By the way, your grades are great. I love using those to choose which cultivars I'm going to grow. But of course, the international registers don't do that. They do, however, keep track of every cultivar that was ever promulgated out there. At least at the beginning, they'll do that. So for lilacs, there's about 3,000 names in the register, but only about 1,800 of them are extant in the world today. 1,800. And many of those are extremely rare, and they do bring big prices on the auction market, and I've paid a few of those over the years. But the register keeps track of all those names and who originated them, when, where, and things like that. So it's not just what's available out there, it's everything, and they have appropriate notes going with each different cultivar as well.
Questions in the back there?
One of the things that I've been worried about as I think about tracking these cultivars and how they do in different regions is because the pawpaw has to be grafted to a seedling, how much can you attribute to this the root stock being compatible with the region instead of just the genetics of the top graft?
Was that for me?
I think it's for you.
Gosh, I don't think there's been any true experiments as in empirical knowledge about that. It's something we wonder about. What is the rootstock influence? And we're getting reports repeatedly over the years of grafted pawpaws, grafted to what we think are some better varieties. And up north, they're not coming through the winter. The top is dying down to the graft union. This requires trials and experiments. You don't know in advance. And I don't know, is that enough of an answer?
I guess
That's what we kind of know. We don't know. Basically, we don't know.
Right, and we did some rootstock experiments out here with seedling rootstocks, but we, once again, didn't really see a lot of difference. The one thing we have noticed, and Greg Riegert and I talked about this when he had his plantings down at Clemson, is it does seem like grafted trees do not live as long as seedling trees. So that might be some evidence of graft incompatibility between the genetics of the rootstock and the genetics of the scion. But right now we don't see dwarfing. We've tried some, I think it was second F2 reticulata semina crosses as rootstock, and then the top scion still grew as vigorously as some of the triloba. So didn't really see an imparting of lack of vigor or anything from that. So, but there's just a lot of work to be done out there.
Certainly in the lilac world, the rootstock doesn't make a difference. The only difference is with different species, you can tell the rootstock from what has been grafted onto it by the different leaf colors and shapes and things like that. Grafted rootstock in lilacs is a no-no because they don't live as long, they're not as vigorous, and we can root cuttings, we can layer them, we can micropropagate them. Well, we can't do this with pawpaws at this point in time, so grafts are what we have.
And I'll say, as an add-on about rootstocks, here we are in the 21st century, and when we talk about apples, we just think like, oh, dwarfing, semi-dwarf, and all that. That all came out of Malling, England, in the mid to late 19th century. Before that time, there was no talk about rootstocks. It was whatever you could get to graft onto. So this is not, the idea of special rootstocks is a new idea with horticulture. It's not one that goes back to the Roman days.
We have time for one more question. I do see a hand up. And yeah, the question was, if the grafted tree dies and the rootstock comes back, can you graft right back onto it? Yes. In fact, I'm really encouraging folks to, establish seedling rootstock and then graft later. I think there's one more question back there. We'll take that yet and then move.
Thanks. Yeah, my question was, would it be a good practice to use rootstock from seedlings from like as close to close to the area that you're planting as possible, like wild seedlings as the rootstock, instead of using seedlings from just from what your cultivars produced?
Yeah, because that's what we usually kind of say. I think Neal said this too. Maybe locally obtain pawpaw seed, because then hopefully if you obtain seed for your rootstock, say in Michigan, if you're up in Michigan and you graft onto that, you can feel better about that, the potential of that rootstock surviving better than if you got that rootstock from Georgia seed, right? Which may not be as winter hardy. So just some, that's how little we know. We just only, basically know we want to do maybe like with like and things like that.
We're at the ground floor of research.
Yeah, ground floor.